Well, the Paralympics is well underway, which means that now is a great time for us to reassess the language we use when referring to people living with disabilities and to understand the impact our words can have. With continuously changing terminology, I guess we may all be guilty of using a term we instantly regret, but the research shows this is a more common experience for Australians than you might think. River Knight is a disability advocate and the founder of Developing Australian Communities. River, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
The research, what did you really set out to uncover?
What I wanted to look at is just how people still view and how they feel about disability in Australia. To look at, what are some of the barriers that are still out there, and what are some of the things that we need to work on still. So, and we found that, the respondents we had reported that, half of them had used a word in an offensive way when describing someone and using disability as an offensive word. And we found that around 18% describe themselves as really still being completely clueless on how to really talk about disability.
Yeah.
But what was interesting was the younger populations, that Generation Zs coming out of school, they said that, about 75% of them said they're quite comfortable. So perhaps that's an educational thing, it's a generational thing, but it's just an area that I guess is important because the way we talk about things and the words that we use are really important for how we shape the culture and the space that we're in Australia.
Well, I guess at least that's a positive then, that the younger ones seem to be onto it.
It is, but even within that younger population, in the schoolyard in primary school, you'll still hear words that describe disability used as an offensive word when trying to say something mean about another child. So it's one of those things that we've got to keep working on. And in Australia, even with our media outlets, radio, TV, we still hear words that we don't want to hear, or we want to change a little bit because it talks about how we look at things. So we don't want to talk about people who are wheelchair bound. They're a person who may use a wheelchair. We don't want to talk about disabled people because it's so finite. It's basically saying that's it, you're disabled. It's a person who may have a type of disability.
So what is you mentioned a couple of things there, but what is really the correct language to use for the disability community?
We like to start with the person first. So we say a person who may have a disability, a person who may need some support from a wheelchair. So we talk about the person first. We also sort of stop and think, do we even need to mention the disability? So, there's conversations where it's probably important, but at other times, if I'm coming into the shop and I'm using a wheelchair and I just want to buy some milk, we don't need to talk about the wheelchair. It's no one's business. I don't walk up to a shop and talk to the person behind the counter and ask them about why they're overweight or why they've got red hair. It's about what's appropriate. And people with disability, I think seeing that We the 15 movement come from the Paralympics and get a lot of exposure has been great because it's talking about the fact that people with disability are just people every day in Australia. They're not there to be your inspiration. They're there to just simply be part of the community. And we need to just relax a little bit because sometimes less is more.
Sure, yeah. The term politically correct gets thrown around a lot these days, doesn't it? But I guess language is, really it's about respecting people, isn't it?
It is, and it's not necessarily the terms we use, it's the way we kind of say it. So, if I say that someone's disabled, it's such an ending way to say something. But if I sort of talk about a person who has a wheelchair or someone who has a disability, a person with autism, it's a different way of looking at it. I'm talking about the person first. But even within the disability sector, we have people that don't like that. So they'll have people that say, don't talk to me about being a person with autism. I'm not carrying around autism in a backpack. I would rather you say that I'm autistic.
Yep.
So even within the disability community itself, people have got different ways they like to be, talked about. And if you're going to, work that one out, talk to the person themselves and ask them, what do you hate? What do you like? What's okay? How should I talk about this? Because I'm not really sure, and that's my problem.
Yep.
It's not your problem, but just let me know what's okay.
And I guess as well, what might seem like maybe a sort of a small slip up to one person can really have a big impact on that person at the receiving end of the comment or phrase.
It is, because the language we use really values or devalues people, and the way
Mm.
we go about it can make a lot of difference. Like I was out shopping with a friend of mine recently at a shopping centre. He uses a very large wheelchair that's chin controlled, so he uses a chin to control a little joystick.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a lot of movement in his arms and legs. And I had this nice lady come up to us, and she looked at me and she didn't acknowledge him, and she said, "You're a beautiful person for taking this poor man out shopping, and
Oh,
isn't it lovely, and I
yeah.
love what you're doing, you're such a wonderful man." And I looked at him and he kind of rolled his eyes, and she said, "Can he talk?" And
Mm.
I looked at him and I just sort of said, "I don't know." I said, "Can you talk?" And he said, "Nah, nah, bro, just tell her I can't talk. I don't know
Yeah.
how yet." And I said, "No, he says he can't talk." And she kind of looked at him a bit funny. She's like, "Oh, but you're such a beautiful person taking him out." And I said, "Apparently I'm beautiful. What do you think?" And he said, "No, you're definitely not beautiful, man. Like, I definitely wouldn't describe you that way." I'm like, "Thanks." Yeah, so
Yeah.
they started having a chat, and then I could
Mm.
walk back a bit and let them talk. And after about a minute, they were just two people having a conversation,
Mm.
and it wasn't awkward, but
Mm.
it's people just aren't sure how to approach things.
Yeah.
So we say just start with the idea that people have capacity and they are just an average normal human being.
Yeah.
Start from there.
And if people do make a mistake, such as in that instance there, what should they do?
Well, just own it, mention it, and say, "Oh, did I say it? I don't know. Is that not the right word? I don't know." No one expects anyone to be an expert on everything,
Mm.
and we can't expect people to do to I guess try and use the right word all of the time. So if the intention isn't to offend, then that's okay. So what we say is have a look at the Paralympics, watch that, see how people are acting, see how people are interacting. There's people in our community that have a lot of value. But we also say, pop in our websites. You can check out, dacommunities.com and have a look at what developing Australian communities are doing. Have a look on our Facebook page. We try and share a lot of that sort of information. But everyone in Australia is not far from someone with a disability in their immediate circle.
Yeah.
Over about half of people over 65 are living with a disability, and when about 15% of the population are living with a disability, that's a lot of people. There's millions of people that people can just simply acknowledge and realise are part of our community.
Yep. Fascinating research. River Knight, remind us about that website to find out more.
So hop on and have a look at dacommunities.com or check us out on Facebook. And we have all our expos and events and a lot of stuff online that people can join in on.
River, thanks very much.
Thanks so much for having me.
River Knight, disability advocate and the founder of Developing Australian Communities. This is